Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. In today's video, let me give you my quick reaction to the Putin-Tucker Carlson interview. And for people who support Russia, they had extremely high expectations. They were very much looking forward to this interview finally coming out. It's the usual cast of characters who support Russia, promoting it like crazy. Elon Musk has pinned it to the top of his Twitter page, so as many of his 172 million followers watch this interview. Convicted child sex offender Scott Ritter likes this interview, wants you to watch it. Conspiracy theorist Alex Jones liked this interview, wants you to watch it. And we've even got members of Congress promoting this interview. This is Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance. He supports Russia. Tweeting, "Just watch this. Fascinating." This is former Republican vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin tweeting out a meme how Putin and Tucker have killed the fake news media. And I want to remind everyone, Putin is an internationally wanted war criminal for abducting children. This is Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville tweeting, "Last night's Tucker Carlson interview with Putin shows that Russia is open to a peace agreement, while it is DC warmongers who want to prolong the war. That is why I'm voting to stop 60 billion more of our tax dollars going to this conflict." So for people who support Russia and hate Ukraine, this is what they wanted to hear. This is what they wanted to see from Putin himself. This is Jenny. Describes herself as Trump 2024, America first. The moment you realize Putin isn't fighting Ukraine, he's fighting the deep state in Ukraine. This is what Russian propaganda pushes here in the United States. A certain percentage of the population believes this, and they wanted to hear this directly from Putin. They wanted Putin to expose the deep states. So here's a list of things that Putin could have talked about. This is what MAGA Republicans want to justify their opposition to supporting Ukraine. The United States is the one risking nuclear war. By supporting Ukraine, this endangers everyone. It's the deep states, the establishment that wants this war, and the people, the ordinary people of America, are suffering. America has a history of warmongering. Their support for Ukraine is no different. It's obvious Carlson wanted Putin to criticize the U.S. economy. Putin didn't do that. U.S. national debts, biggest threat to America is our southern border. Carlson at some points in the interview was trying to get insider information. Putin has been in the room with Bill Clinton, with George Bush, with Barack Obama, with Joe Biden. Tucker was desperately looking for some validation that these are pedophiles and lizard people and all the other deep state conspiracy theories about the Bushes, the Clintons, and Obama. Trans people just beat up on the LGBTQ community. That's something Russia does frequently, but Putin didn't go there in the interview. And then Putin could have talked about how Christians are being oppressed by secular progressives, or whatever MAGA wants to call people. But we didn't get any of that in this interview. Here's a tweet from Ambassador McFowle. "Tucker Carlson did a huge service by sponsoring the Putin monologue, helping to expose to a new audience, the MAGA audience, to Putin's craziness. Even Tucker seemed a little disappointed in his hero." So Kremlin propaganda here in America has built Putin up as this mythical figure, standing up to the evilness of the deep states. And we finally got a 2-hour interview, an exclusive sit-down with the hero of the MAGA movement, really. And Putin did not deliver. Putin rambled. He sounded kind of crazy. He was fixated on historical dates and historical events that had no relevancy to what's happening today. And you could see the reaction on Tucker Carlson. He was trying to steer the conversation towards relevant events of today. and Putin just kept wanting to talk about what happened in the 1600s. That moment when you wanted a sensational interview with Putin to humiliate the United States and NATO, but got a 2-hour lesson in crazy, made-up Eastern European history. The soundbite that I think people have latched on to the most is when Putin started rationalizing why it was okay for Hitler to invade Poland. Poland refused to negotiate and give up territory, so the Nazis were justified in starting World War II and invading Poland. That was kind of a weird historical narrative to go on, justifying the actions of the Nazis, but Putin went there. And I want to share with you some highlights that stood out to me when I watched the clip. The first one is Tucker Carlson getting lost by the history lesson and even asking Putin, what the hell are you talking about?
Including to Kiev.
I beg your pardon, could you tell us what period, I'm losing track of where in history we are, the Polish oppression of Ukraine?
It was in the 13th century.
So when was the Polish oppression of Ukraine that you're talking about? The 13th century. For MAGA supporters who want Russia to win, they're not big readers. They're not big fans of history. If something happened 800 years ago, that's not really relevant to today. Tucker, at several points in the interview, even tried to clarify this, saying, what you're saying isn't actually relevant. So at one point in the interview, Putin tries to present historical documents to Tucker, and Tucker is just bewildered why Putin is doing this.
I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
I don't know why you're presenting these documents. How is this relevant to what you did invading Ukraine 2 years ago? This interview was supposed to be for the American audience. Given that Congress is debating $60 billion of additional military aid, for people like Tucker who want to stop this aid, this was Putin's opportunity to make his case directly to the American people. Stop supporting Ukraine. Just allow Russia to win. But Americans don't really respect historical claims from 800 years ago. Given that the lands we currently live on, North America, belonged to some other people 800 years ago. Additionally, the United States used to be the 13 colonies of Great Britain. We at one point were British subjects 300 years ago. Let's not talk about what was happening 300 years ago. Today we identify as Americans. So to deny Ukrainian nationalism or identity today, based on what was going on centuries ago, this isn't an argument that's going to play with an American audience. This was an hour and 3 minutes into the interview. This is pretty hilarious. Tucker Carlson is trying to get information about Biden. Several points in the interview, Tucker, I think, wanted Putin to give some insider dirt on U.S. leaders. You were in the room with George Bush. You were in the room with Tony Blair. You were in the room with Barack Obama. Tell us that the deep state is real, that our political leaders are all corrupt and trying to destroy America, and only Trump is a legitimate, fair president who should be reelected come November.
You wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
There were several points where Tucker was giving him a leading question so that he could go down that conspiracy road. And Putin was just like, I don't know. I don't remember. My memory's not that good. So this is an hour and 16 minutes into the interview. Tucker is trying to set up this multipolar world's narrative being a good thing. Putin could have talked about the BRICS alliance. Putin could have talked about how Russia's greatness in the world and prestige is rising, especially in Africa and the Middle East, and Putin didn't take the bait.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side, do you think?
Listen, you have said that the world is breaking into two hemispheres. A human brain is divided into two hemispheres. What?
The human brain is divided into two hemispheres? So what's happening here is Putin is the richest man in the world. He's been the dictator of Russia for 24 years. Nobody challenges him. Nobody corrects him. Nobody gives him bad information about what's happening in his country. So Putin needed to prepare for this interview, knowing that Americans and Westerners would be the primary audience. These are Tucker Carlson's fans. And Putin didn't get the coaching. He didn't get the debate prep. He didn't get the talking points to appeal to the American audience. He just talked about what he wanted to talk about. And what Putin talks about is historical claims and esoteric Russian history that nobody in the West cares about. Here's another clip talking about the U.S. economy and inflation. This was Putin's opportunity to say that things in America aren't going well and the U.S. economy is suffering because of all these sanctions being placed on Russia. The talking point is sanctions on Russia hurt America more than it's hurting Russia. And once again, Putin couldn't land the question.
Let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the universally accepted currency?
Is the supremacy of the US dollar going to be supplanted because of America's foolish actions of opposing or being adversarial to the BRICS alliance? This is Putin's opportunity to say, yes, America is economically hurting itself by being adversarial with Russia and China.
How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the U.S. political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world. Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the U.S.
Putin just stated that inflation in the United States is minimal. Inflation is low and it's pretty good for the United States. That's not what he's supposed to be saying. He might as well just say, vote for Joe Biden in November. The U.S. economy is doing very well. Oops. This is an hour and 47 minutes into the interview, and I just want to highlight Tucker's face as Putin continues to ramble about stuff that happened centuries ago.
There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors, the Golden Horde, and then end with the Roman Empire. It seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind.
Talking about the Golden Horde and the Roman Empire. Almost 2 hours into the interview, that's what Putin wanted to talk about. Tucker could not get him on track to feed the deep state conspiracy narratives that he pushes on his own broadcast. So this was a huge failure for Tucker Carlson. I actually owe Tucker Carlson an apology. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I know there's a lot of people who support Russia based on the propaganda that they've received from people like Tucker Carlson. And now that they've had firsthand experience with the dictator of Russia, rambling incoherently about historical claims from 1,000 years ago, I think this seriously hurt Russia's support here in the United States. This interview was a complete flop. Now, if Tucker Carlson was a real journalist, these are the questions he should have asked. These are the questions he should have focused on with this golden opportunity to interview the dictator of Russia. How many Russian soldiers have died in your special military operation? A responsible and ethical Western journalist, if given the opportunity to interview Putin, should ask Putin questions that no Russian journalist is ever allowed to ask. These are questions that the Russian people want to hear from their leader. Topics that Putin would never talk about openly because he's a dictator. Next question, why aren't Russian soldiers being rotated? Given that they were mobilized in September of 2022, some of these men aren't getting their leave time that's guaranteed under law. They're not being allowed to see their families. When are Russian soldiers going to be allowed to rotate? If you want to talk about historical claims, what about China's claims to Outer Manchuria? This is land that Russia took through war 200 years ago. But if we want to go back in time and talk about the 1300s, shouldn't Outer Manchuria, Vladivostok, belong to China and not Russia? Where is Admiral Sokolov, the commander of the Black Sea fleets? Ukraine says he was killed 6 months ago, and he's not been seen alive in 6 months. Is the Russian military hiding that the commander of the Black Sea fleet was killed? What about these Ukrainian deep strikes on oil refineries? How are you going to stop these? How are you going to protect the Russian people if Ukraine has this long-range capability? What the hell happened with the Wagner Group? How did you allow Prigozhin, your former personal chef, to become so powerful where he was seriously threatening your capital city of Moscow? Why did you change the Russian constitution so you can stay in office forever? Russia drafted a democratic constitution in 1992 in which presidents had term limits so they wouldn't become dictators. Yet you changed the constitution to stay in office forever. Do you think this is fair to the Russian people? Other pro-peace candidates are being kept off the ballots. That Katerina woman, Boris Netizin, was just removed from the ballot. How can you say that your own democratic election is fair when you keep excluding candidates that oppose your special military operation? What's going on with all these utility disasters happening across Russia? Millions of Russians have taken to social media to say that they don't have heat, they don't have electricity, they don't have running water. Do you think that all these utility failures are a result of you diverting resources from the civilian population to your war in Ukraine? So an ethical Western journalist would have covered any of these topics. Obviously, Tucker Carlson isn't going to ask any of these. This was a setup in order to make Putin look good. And I argue it had the opposite effect. It did not make Putin look good. I sold out my country, and all I got was this shitty interview. I think Tucker Carlson regrets this. It did more damage to his cause than helped. This is good news for Ukraine. And who knows, maybe someone like Tucker Carlson, after being able to meet the dictator of Russia, will say, maybe I regret what I've been doing and I can talk about other topics. I don't have to talk about Russia on my program going forward. So those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed this video and want to share it with other people. I know this is like the top story happening right now. I'll be back tomorrow with my regular update about Ukraine. Until then, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.